Our last session for this afternoon before we break for dinner and get ready for our events in the evening and activities tonight. Brother Brandon Britton is here with us, and there are a lot of things I could say about Brandon, but Brandon is a very honest preacher, and he's very honest with the Word of God, with others, and with himself. And that's why I thought he was the perfect choice to come and talk to us today. But I don't even care about myself.
To the young people who have been in the different classes throughout today, been going to the different breakout sessions and things like that, you may not know what has been going on out here in the auditorium, but at least in the last couple of sessions, the ones that I were able to catch, Chance has been out here. And what he's been doing, which very important, very needed, trying to explain to your parents, your grandparents, your youth ministers, your elders, the folks that are older than you, the folks that drove you down here probably, trying to explain to them and get them to understand the mind frame and the worldview of your generation. Trying to get across to them that the way they see the world, the way they understand the world, the way they move through the world and think as they navigate it, is radically different than the way you see the world and understand the world. And he's done a really great job of doing that, by the way. But now I want to take a few minutes and do the other thing, not because I'm an expert in young people, but because I'm an expert in old people. You see all this. So this is, if you want to know what my credentials are, this is it right here. These are my credentials. It's kind of like stripes on a jacket if you're in the military. These are my stripes. And and I've earned every one of them. But I want to explain to you young people a little bit about how your parents and grandparents and ministers and elders and all of those folks, how they see the world, and how, quite frankly, from our perspective, the world's a really strange place right now for us. The way that the world is to you is the way it's always been. If you're under the age of 18, whatever you were born into, this world that you were born into, this is normal for you. And by the way, that's true of all of us. Whatever type of home you were born into, if you've been born in a Muslim home, if you were born in an atheist home, if you were born in a home with a loving mom and dad and everybody hugs each other and eats dinner together every night, or if you were born in a home with an alcoholic, abusive father that everybody ran and was afraid of, whatever you were born into, that's normal for you, even if it's abnormal. That doesn't mean that your circumstances are good and healthy and normal, but it's normal to you because you've never known anything different. This is how it is. And the world that you were born into, if you're under the age of 18 especially, for most of our life, this is not what the world was like. Now you think, what are you even talking about? This is just how things are. Exactly, but they weren't always this way. They became this way. And so many of us have spent most of our lives, and the farther back you go in a person's age, the longer they have spent. And they think, this world's a little bit strange now. It's not like it was when I was young. It's not like it was when I first married or went to college or when I was in elementary school or when I was a kid. This world is really, really strange. Just one simple example, I'll just tell you this. The world that we live in now, for my generation and anybody above me, certainly, this is what we called science fiction, where you could see, any of you remember the first time, I think it was maybe Back to the Future 2. If you're of my parents' generation, it was probably Star Trek, where you could talk to somebody and see them at the same time, video call. Most of you in this room can remember, a lot of you in this room can remember party lines, can't you? Now, I'm not going to explain that to the kids. You tell them that on the ride home. That'll keep them from falling. Actually, that'll put them to sleep. But anyway, you tell them what a party line is. So video phone, what we call FaceTime, Skype, any of that stuff, to us, that's science. We're now living in the world that we used to watch was the distant future. Self-driving cars. You've never known a world where they didn't exist, but for a lot of us, most of our lives, this kind of stuff did not exist. And so, in a lot of ways, the world's a strange place, but it's not just when it comes to technology, because listen, if you come from the generation that is mine and up, you come from a time when questions about sexuality and gender and I would even say to a degree faith in general, these were things that were not confusing. These were things that were not debatable. These were not things people had conversations about. This is just how things are, and that's the way they are, and the idea of anything different is just crazy. Now, you're born into a world that's not like that, and I know you've probably heard a lot already over the last couple of days about truth and the fact that there is such a thing as truth and that truth is an eternal thing. It doesn't change from one generation or culture to the next, but for some of us, that was how it was. That's not how it is anymore. And so, whether we like it or not, whether we address it or not, whether we do a good job or not, there is a very, very significant generation gap. There's a line where people see the world and experience it one way, and another group of people that are right here amongst us, we're from the same family, from the same churches, from the same region of the country, and yet this group sees the world radically different. My focus in this session is not to address that, but I just wanted us to understand something. Until we realize that there is a difference, and by the way, let me say this. Younger generation, there are some different ways that y'all see the world that are way better than my generation and up ever saw them. There are problems that have existed for far too long in our country that your generation is finally being willing to stand up to and face it and say, you know what, it shouldn't be like this in the church, in the world, or anywhere otherwise. And I applaud you for that. But now at the same time, there are also things that those that are older than you, the way they see the world, that are just as valuable and important that don't need to be abandoned. What really needs to happen is they all have to make sure we keep the lines of communication open amongst generations, and where we understand and learn from others, because yes, older generations, we can learn some things from the younger generation. And younger generation, yes, we do have some valuable things to pass on to you. I used to tell my boys this all the time at different stages of their life. The one that comes to my mind now is like when my son was about 14 years old, and I remember telling him, I said, son, you've never been 14. This is your first time right now being 14. I have been a 14-year-old boy. I've been a 14-year-old and a 15-year-old and 16-year-old and on and on and on. And not only have I been a 14-year-old boy, but I've been the daddy of a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So there's some things that I understand because I've already walked down this road that you're just now encountering you don't understand. So I'm asking you to give me a little benefit of the doubt. And because of our relationship, give me a little bit of trust. That's going to be important because as we have some of these conversations about how we see the world different, we're going to butt up against each other. And if we don't have a relationship across the generations where we love and trust each other, then we just won't talk to each other, and we'll just fracture and splinter and fracture and splinter and fracture and splinter. Now, all that was for free. Now I'm going to talk about my topic, okay? These are strange times in a lot of ways because on the one hand, we're living in a time when people are obsessively concerned about themselves. My topic is, I don't care about me. But every one of us knows that we're living in a time when people seem to be hyper concerned about themselves. They worry too much about themselves. They are constantly thinking about it, obsessing about themselves to the point that they ignore other people around them, or they don't care how their thoughts, actions, and attitudes influence or affect anybody around them. Last night I was at a concert and I got distracted watching this younger girl in front of me with her phone. And here's another one of those examples of where we're hyper concerned about ourselves. We've got new terminology, selfies and humble brag and things like that just accentuate the fact that we really, really are obsessed with ourselves. And by the way, that's not generational. That's a struggle that all generations, that all people have, is thinking too much of myself or not thinking highly enough of myself. Now, if you're of a younger generation, you seem to be much more open to talking about those struggles, about insecurity and depression, fear and anxiety, dread. Younger generations seem to be much more confident and comfortable to talk about it openly, to promote it, to put it out there to let everybody know. But I would also caution us. We don't need to go into either extremes that are dangerous. In my generation, the extreme was you don't talk about that stuff. You don't tell people that you're depressed. And by the way, that's not a healthy attitude. But if we're not careful, the pendulum will swing to the opposite extreme, which is where we begin to glamorize and glorify things like depression. And that's the scary trend that I see us moving towards culturally right now. It's bad to not ever talk about it. It's equally bad to glorify it because it's not something to aspire to. It's not something that needs to become the next trend. And I'm afraid that that's what's starting to happen. So we've got to find that balance in the middle. But I was watching this girl last night with her phone, and she was going to do what we all do. Whenever we're somewhere, we've got to document that we've been there. By the way, we don't document it for ourselves, do we? If we document it for ourselves, what we do, we take our phone out, we take a picture, and then we keep it. That's what we did when I was growing up. Again, you'll see the difference. When I was growing up, we went somewhere. You go to Disneyland, what do? You stand in front of the castle, you get the camera out, you take the camera. A month later, you get it mailed back to you, and you go pick it up at Walmart, and then you realize, they had their eyes shut. Well, you know what you did with it? Didn't matter. It's going in the photo album anyway. Because you wanted to commemorate, you wanted a tangible representation of that moment. You wanted something 25 years later to now be able to look at and go, you know what, you remember that day, and then you start talking about, you remember how we rode the tilt-a-whirl when we got sick, and then you go off onto that. That's not what we do with pictures anymore, though, is it? Strangely enough, now we take so many photographs that they don't even have value anymore. They're meant to be disposable, not disposable cameras, but disposable photographs. They're meant to be taken, whether it's on our social media or Snapchat or whatever. It appears for a while, then it disappears. Of course, Sometimes we learn the hard way, nothing ever disappears on the internet. But I was watching this girl, and she wanted to document that she was at this concert, so she gets everything lined up right, and she gets herself in focus just right, and she takes the picture, and I'm sitting there watching her, and I can see over her shoulder, and I know I'm a creepy old man watching somebody on their phone. I get it, but listen, this is a social experiment. I knew I had to talk about this today. And I watch as she takes the picture, and she begins to manipulate it. She begins to move the image around. She begins to filter it through, crop things out. She begins to whiten her teeth. She begins to slim her jawline. And she's changing it, and she's doing all the... Listen, she's hyper concerned about herself. She is too concerned about herself to the point that when she got done with the picture, and I could see when she got finished, I thought she had stolen somebody's phone. Because that was not the girl that was sitting in front of me. So there's a way in which we can be hyper concerned about ourselves. We're too worried about ourselves. We're too obsessed with ourselves. We're too concerned about our image. By the way, if that's something that we struggle with, that's something that we need to work on remedying. That's not the mindset that God wants us to have. And again, so much of what I'm going to talk about today is about finding balance between the extremes. Most of our time today is going to be talking about, I don't care about me. That's where the real meat's going to be. But I feel like in this culture, it has to be addressed that sometimes we care too much about me. I only care about me. I don't care about how what I do affects the people around me. And listen, if you are a part of the body of Christ, you don't have that luxury. 1 Corinthians 12 says that by one Spirit we've all been baptized into one body. And then Paul uses this illustration where he walks us through and shows how each part of the body has a function that it performs. And even though it has its own unique function, what happens to it and what it does affects every other part of the body. And so if you have already made the commitment through confession and baptism into Christ this weekend or before this weekend, or if you wind up making it before this weekend is over, you've got to understand something. You don't have the luxury of only being worried about you and how your words affect you, or how your dress affects you, or how your actions or attitudes affect you, because you're connected to the body of Christ, and what you do affects the whole body. You don't have the luxury of only being worried about yourself. Now, if we are too far in that extreme of being hyper concerned about self, I care too much about me, there's a remedy for it. I don't have time to really dig deep into it, but I want you to read Philippians chapter 1 and chapter 2, just the first half of that letter, and you get a healthy perspective of what it looks like when I don't care about me in a good way. Because it's not always bad to say, I don't care about me. If you're going to be a husband, a wife, a parent, a leader, you're going to need to develop the mindset of, I don't care about me. And what I mean by that is, I don't care about my way. I don't care that I'm the one that gets what I want. In fact, the mentality of those people I describe has got to be, I'm more concerned about the people that I represent than myself. I don't have to get my way all the time. In Philippians chapter 1, Paul talks about these people who were going out and preaching Jesus, but he tells us that their motive isn't right. He said they preach Christ of envy and strife. King James says, supposing to add affliction to my bonds. Paul's already in jail. And Paul says there are some brothers that are going around preaching Christ, but they're actually doing it in a way in which they're trying to stir up conflict. They're trying to stir up contention. By the way, those people still exist in the church today. And they're doing it because they're trying to heap grief on me. They're trying to make my life more difficult than it already is, even though I'm imprisoned. Now, what was Paul's attitude? Man, I'm working on this one, I'll be honest with you. Paul says, Christ is preached, and therein do I rejoice, and yea, I will rejoice. Even though they're doing wrong, the gospel's being preached. Their attitude's wrong, their motives are wrong, their actions are wrong, but Christ is being preached. And as long as the gospel is being preached, I'm going to rejoice, even if it results in my life being made more difficult. Now, I'm going to tell you something. That's a man whose mindset is, I don't care about me. I don't care if they lock me up and if they beat me. If Christ is being magnified, that's all I want. And he's going to close out the chapter saying that. If I live, I'm going to live for Christ. And if I die, that is gain. And so Paul says, do what you've got to do, because my life is an offering to God. And then in chapter 2, he gives us the alpha demonstration of it. And he says, you know where I learned this? Do you know why I don't care what happens to me? You know why I don't care about me? Because I look at Jesus and I see that Jesus was in the form of God, and yet he didn't consider that something that he was going to hold on to with both hands and refuse to let go. Instead, he made himself of no reputation. He humbled himself, became a man, took on the form of a servant, and even became obedient unto the death. Paul said, even the death of the cross. And so he says, when I look at Jesus, I see someone whose mindset is, I don't care about me. I care about everybody else more than myself. And if I have to sacrifice, if I have to give something up, even if that's my life, even if it's my privilege, even if it's my position of power, I will yield all of that if it means that I can save all of you. And Paul says, that's where I learned that from, Jesus. And then he says, or before that he says, so let this mind be in you. This is the way that we need to be thinking. If you want to see a positive spin to the topic, I don't care about me, that's what it looks like. I don't care about what my life is as long as Christ is magnified. I don't care what I have to endure or go through as long as the gospel is preached. I'm more concerned about Christ, His church, my brethren, than I am about myself. That's a positive way in which we can have the mindset of, I don't care about me. But everybody in here knows that's really not what we're talking about today, is it? I just couldn't go without saying that, because culturally, I'm afraid that's a message we need maybe more now than we would have 10 years ago. So let's close out by talking about the other side of it. What about I don't care about me in the negative sense? If I forget to say it, let me go ahead and say this right up front. Low self-esteem, thinking that you're worthless, thinking that you don't matter, is not the same thing as humility. Humility doesn't require that you think you're worthless, that you're worth nothing. When God calls us to humility, and by the way, that's what I don't care about me in the positive sense looks like, humility. The humble mind of Christ. God doesn't want us to think that we're worth nothing. He just doesn't want us to think that everything revolves around us. But a lot of folks struggle with feeling like I am worthless. Just out of curiosity, anybody keep their napkin from lunch? Anybody have one right now? Raise your hand. Hold it up if you got it. Napkin. Looking for a napkin from lunch. One. There's a mom. I didn't even see if you were a man, woman, anything. I just saw, I was like, if it's a napkin from lunch, that's a mom, because she's going to put it in her purse. It's going to go in the minivan glove box with all the rest of them. I saw two. I think I saw two held up and waved. I only did that to make a point. Nobody kept the napkins. Were those free, by the way? You're free to you, but they weren't free, were they? Church, Brian, anybody, y'all buy those? Hope you bought it. Hope you didn't steal them. If you stole them, I'm going to change my sermon. We're going to preach a different message. No, somebody had to pay for those. Those weren't free. They don't just give you napkins, especially if you go to McDonald's. Don't get me started on that. Don't you hate when I'm going to do it? You drive off and you get in there and you got stuff all over you and you go in there and there's no napkin in there. You know. They don't just give you those because somebody had to pay for them. But if you didn't have to pay for it, and none of us, I don't think, had to pay for the napkins that we got at lunch. If you don't have to pay for it, you know what usually means? You don't really value it either, do you? Until you need it. And then you value it a lot, don't you? I want to suggest something to you. The reason you didn't keep that napkin, and I know what we did with it. Think about it. we wiped our mouths with it. Like you got ketchup or mustard, and so what do? You wipe your mouth with it. Perfectly clean, perfectly folded, perfectly made napkin. And what do? You defile it by wiping your nasty mouth on it. And you wipe your hands on it, and you wad it up, and you sneeze into it, and some of you blew your nose into it. And then you just threw it in the trash. You know why? Because it's worthless to you. It's worthless. You don't care anything about it. That's okay for a napkin. But sometimes the reason that we don't care about ourselves, I don't care about me, is because somewhere along the line we've been made to feel worthless. Now, there's a lot of reasons why people feel that way. A whole lot of them is too big for a topic like this. Sometimes people feel worthless because they've been treated like they were worthless. Everybody in this room has witnessed, experienced, or enacted bullying on somebody else. You've picked on, made fun of, harassed somebody else, in person or online. Everybody in this room has likely done that. If you haven't, then you likely have had it done to you. If it has not been done to you and you haven't done it to anyone, then I promise you, you fit the other category of you have witnessed it. I wish there was a way we could fix that about humans. I don't know why we feel the need to degrade and tear down and insult and hurt each other. That just seems to be something that's broken inside of us. But I want to suggest this to you. One of the dangers of treating each other that way, of talking about each other that way, is we make people feel like they're worthless. I don't have to ask for a show of hands because just when I talked about that, I saw some of the heads nod and I saw some people close their eyes. I saw some people put their heads down. And I know what that means. You know that you have either made someone feel worthless or somebody's made you feel worthless. And so sometimes one of the reasons we might say, I don't care about me, and then our actions demonstrate it, that we don't really care about ourselves, is because someone has made us feel worthless. They've treated us in a way in which they've said, you're like a napkin to me. I'll wipe my mouth with you, I'll wad you up, and then I'll throw you away. And we start to believe that about ourselves. It's especially more powerful if the people who did that to you are the people whose primary responsibility is to instill a sense of self-worth and value in you. I'm talking about your parents, your grandparents, your teachers, your coaches, your preachers, your Sunday school teachers. In other words, the people whose primary responsibility is to love and protect you. But if you come from an environment where those people did not do that, I don't have to tell you that it's going to be hard for anybody, preacher or otherwise, spouse, anybody, counselor, anybody, to convince you that you're not worthless. And there's a lot of people who are walking around saying, I don't care about me because the people who were supposed to care about them the most made them feel the most worthless. Sometimes we feel worthless, not because something that somebody else has done to us. Sometimes it's because, look, we live in a broken world, and sometimes we're broken from the beginning. Our minds, our chemical imbalances. We might be talking about depression that you have, chemical problems that you have. Sometimes it's not that somebody did something to you. Maybe you grew up in a home where you were shown love and you were valued and people did care for you. But when you look in the mirror, you don't see what they see. Matter of fact, when someone says, I love you, you mean the world to me. Any of you feel like your skin crawls when somebody says that? Because you're sitting there thinking, how could you love something as disgusting as me? And you can fill in the blank for the reason you feel that way. I only want to make this point. There's a lot of times in this life that we feel like we're worthless. And it's not because we did something to make ourselves feel that way. It may be what somebody else did to us. It may be just something that we don't know how to fix. I've got this written down because I want to make sure I say it exactly right. If what I just said describes you in any way, if you grew up in that broken home, if you had to endure that abusive relationship, if the people who were supposed to show you that you mattered, if the people who were supposed to instill in you the truth that you were made in the image of God and that Jesus loved you and died for you, but those people made you feel worthless, or for any other reason you just feel that way, then I want you to hear this very, very clearly. You may not have done anything to cause it. You may not have done anything to cause it. But that doesn't mean you are powerless to do anything about it. I'm going to say this probably 5 more times because somebody needs to hear this today. You may not have done anything to cause you to feel the way you feel. It might just be unfair. Somebody was sinful and wrong and wicked and corrupt, and they did things that made you feel this way that you never should have had to experience. You might not have done anything to cause you to feel this way, but that does not mean you're powerless to do anything about it. You can choose to live differently. Now, I want to share this with you. And I wrote all this stuff down because sometimes I just freestyle when I'm talking, but there's some things, it's got to be said just right or it's going to be misunderstood. Here's what I mean by you're not powerless to do anything about it. What if you allowed the Spirit of God to work in you through His Word every day to transform your mind? And when I say transform your mind, I mean transform the way you think about yourself. One of the things that I'm a big believer in is prayer, but I also don't think that prayer is the only solution, because I know what some of you are going to say. Do you know how hard I have prayed to not think like this? You know how long I've been begging God to take this away? I want to suggest something to you. Prayer is an important part, but it's not the whole story. It's not the only thing you need to do. I want to ask you this question. Are you doing every day what you need to do to feed your mind? Think about Romans 12, not being conformed to this world, but being transformed. How? By the renewing of your mind. I want you to step back and look at that passage from a different perspective. This is a command. Don't conform to this world. Question, do you believe that you have the power? I'm not talking about mental health, I'm just talking about in general. Do you believe as a Christian that you have the power to not conform to the world? Is that something that you can do something about? Absolutely. That's what this whole weekend's been about, hasn't it? Telling us, look, there's some stuff that we need to quit doing. There's some things that we need to stop engaging in. Practices that we need to... Yes, you have power to not conform to the world. So let me ask you this question. In the same sentence where we're told, don't conform to this world, we're also told to what? Be transformed. By the renewing of your mind. You have some power in this. You have some say-so in this. There's something you can do. I'm not going to pretend it's going to be quick and easy, that you can do one thing, go home, read your Bible at night, say a prayer, you're going to wake up tomorrow, everything's going to be different. What Paul calls on us to do is a constant renewal of the mind, something that goes on perpetually. Not something you just do once. I hope that if you need Christ in your life, that this weekend you'll make your way to the front and do whatever it is you need to do. If it's an erring Christian, it's come back. If it's not as a Christian, that you'll become one. I hope that you do that, but I hope more than anything you understand that that alone is not going to fix everything. That's step one of a daily renewal that you're going to have to do with God in His Word, so that He can begin the work through His Word of transforming your mind. So that He can begin to transform the way you see and think about yourself. And so I want you to understand, you might not have done anything to cause this, but that doesn't mean you're powerless to do anything about it. Allow God to work through His Word every day to transform your mind and the way you think about yourself. And let me ask you this, what if you could begin developing the mind of Christ? Is that something that you can do? Again, Philippians 2, let this mind be in you. He's calling on us to do that. It's not wishful thinking. It's not magic. It's not crossing your fingers. Paul's saying, look, you can do what I have learned to do. And by the way, he says that he had learned it. When you get over in chapter 4, remember, chapter 4 is connected to chapter 1. It's all the same letter. Paul talks about all the things that he's been through. He says, you know what? I've gone to bed hungry and I've gone to bed full. And in all the situations that I have been in, all the circumstances, he said, I have, finish the sentence, learned in whatsoever state I am therewith to be content. Having a transformed mind, having the mind of Christ is something that every one of us are capable of learning. Not on our own, not apart from God, not apart from His Word, not apart from His church. But don't think for a moment there's nothing you can do about it. Now, as I close out, here's where I want to close. Go to Jeremiah chapter 2. My hardest parts of sermons are always how to start and how to finish. As Bill was preaching a little while ago, something dawned on me. He was in Isaiah, and it got me to thinking, preachers, those of you who are preachers in this room, those of you who are Bible class teachers in this room, if you want to know the type of teaching that we're going to have to do to resonate with the culture of today, it's going to have to be prophetic preaching. And by prophetic, I mean preaching from the prophets. The church in America in the 21st century is like Israel during the days of the prophets in the Old Testament. There was a former glory and a former beauty and a former zeal that has largely been lost as we have evolved into our culture. We have become like the nations round about us. And there's only one way to address that problem, and that's through the preaching of the prophets, because that was the problem they were addressing. I've heard it said before that it took God, one day to get Israel out of Egypt, and it took Him 40 years to get Egypt out of Israel. And then they got into Canaan, and what did they do? Then they adopted Assyria and Babylon and Egypt and all the other pagan nations. They became just like them, and then it took God 70 years in captivity to get it back out of them again. And that's why I want to close with Jeremiah chapter 2, because I spent just about the whole time today talking about sometimes we don't care about ourselves because other people have done things to us to make us think that we're worthless. If that's you, the rest of this sermon is not addressed to you. I need to make that real clear. If the reason that you feel like you're worthless is because you've been treated that way by people who were supposed to love you, then what I'm going to say for the rest of this, I'm not talking to you. That's real important to me that you understand that, because I don't want you leaving here thinking that it's your fault that you feel the way you feel. Because what I'm talking about for the rest of it is for those of us maybe that didn't grow up like that. I didn't grow up in an abusive home. I grew up with a mom and dad that loved me. In fact, if you ask my wife, she'll tell you that they spoiled me. You know what the difference is between spoiled and loved, though, is, don't you? I finally figured it out. You're only spoiled if you expect it. I wasn't spoiled, I was loved. And I thank God every day that I was born into that kind of a family, because I deal with people every day who weren't. And I see the brokenness that they have because of it. But I don't want to stand up here and be high and mighty. Like Wes said, I've been way too honest in this pulpit before to try to be high and mighty. You know my dirty laundry. I was broken too. Not because my parents broke me, but because I broke myself in my own sinfulness. And so that's who I want to talk to as we close out and prepare for the invitation. What if you have started to feel worthless? What if now you don't care about yourself? You don't care what happens to you. You don't care what people think about you. You don't care about what your actions, how they impact other people. And the reason you don't is because you've become so warped by sin. You've lived and practiced sinfulness for so long that it's warped your mind. Listen, if your mind can be transformed to be like the mind of Christ, it can also be warped to be like the brokenness that is in the world. And that's the people that Jeremiah was talking to in Jeremiah chapter 2. He's talking to a people who were born into luxury, born into blessings, that were born in the land of Zion with all the milk and honey. If you look at verse number 5, he says this, "What wrong did your fathers find in me?" God is asking this question through Jeremiah. "What wrong did your fathers find in me that they went far from me?" God's asking this question. What did I do? I brought you out of bondage in Israel. I gave you this, or in Egypt, I gave you this land of Canaan, a land flowing with milk and honey. I went before you and drove the people out. I've built a hedge of protection around you. I've supplied you with all of your needs. You had nothing that you needed except for a relationship with me. And what did you do? You went away from me. What did I do to deserve that? Let me ask you a question. Did God make Israel feel worthless? No. He showed them every day when they were in the wilderness and they woke up and there was manna on the ground. How much He loved and valued. When they said we need water, He made water flow from a rock to show you, this is what I'll do to take care of you because I love you so much. God never made Israel feel worthless. But look how the verse continues. "What wrong did your fathers find in me that they went far from me and went after worthlessness and became worthless?" You know why God wants you to worship Him and have no other gods before Him? You know why? If we'll be honest, sometimes maybe we scratch our head and say, is God vain? You can only worship me. I want you to worship me, bow before me, love me, worship me. If anybody else said that, we would think they were vain, wouldn't we? And yet that's exactly what God says. But do you know why God says that? Because what you worship, you will become like. Now, what do we know about God? God is love. God is light. God is merciful, kind, forgiving, full of grace. I mean, think about all those good things you know about God. God is all of those things. And you know what He's not? In Him is no darkness. He can't even lie. Now, can you say that about anybody else or anything else? That it's all perfect and there's nothing bad? No. God wants you to worship Him and Him only because you will become like the thing that you worship. Any of you have any idols? I don't mean, in the sense that we talk about idolatry. I mean in the sense that we use it in the world. Maybe it's somebody on YouTube, and maybe it's a football player, maybe it's a movie star, maybe it's a musician. I don't know who it is. You probably got somebody that you look up to. And you'll see it most clearly in young people. Do y'all remember after the movie Frozen came out that basically every little girl in America was dressed like Elsa? We were in Olive Garden one night, and there were 3 little Elsas sitting there in Olive Garden, dresses, the whole everything. Well, I didn't have to wonder too long who their idol was. They wanted to be like Elsa. Even a little child, you see it demonstrated. What you worship, you will become like. And here's what the problem was with Israel. They had God. They were to worship God, and they would become like God, but then instead they looked around at all the nations around them and all of the other gods, and they embraced their gods and their ways, and what happened? Over time, they became like them. They went after things that were worthless, and after a while, how did they begin to see themselves? Verse 5 says they became worthless. So here's what I want to suggest to you. It just might be the case that sometimes the reason that we don't care about ourselves is because we've spent so much time caring about things that are actually worthless. Things that don't matter. I don't want to be the old man in the room that gripes about social media, but folks, it's just true. How many likes or shares or I don't even know what the terms are anymore. Views, whatever it is. Does it really matter? Is there anything tangible to it? I mean, don't get me wrong, it feels good, right, for a minute. That girl I was watching last night, I watched her face light up as people started liking it, and she checked it. And I'm sitting here thinking, you wanted to document this moment at this concert that you're so excited about, but really what you didn't want to sit down and enjoy the concert. You wanted everybody to see, everybody that you know to go, look how much fun she's having. Look how good her life is. I wish my life was like hers. Like, share, comment. And she sat there, rather than watch the concert that she paid money to come and see, she watched her phone the whole night to see what people were saying about her being there. And every time, and she checked it like every 2 minutes, refreshing it. I don't know that girl. I'll likely never see her again, but I've been that girl. I've cared about that kind of stuff. If I let myself, I'll still care about it. It's human nature. We can't help it. But here's what I want to suggest to you. Sometimes the reason we don't feel like we're worth anything is because we care too much about things that aren't worth anything. And we become like what we worship. So I want to ask you this question. Be honest with yourself. Is it the case that for some of us, the grief that we feel, this I don't care about me attitude, is it the case that some of it is self-inflicted? Well, see, there's good news if it is. If I'm the one, you remember the game? You ever played this game with your little brother? You know, you hold him down, you take his hand, make him do this, and you say, stop hitting yourself. Okay. Well, it's not like that, but you know what? Here's the thing. If you really are hitting yourself, you can stop anytime you want. If the reason that I feel worthless is because I'm worshiping worthless things, is because my focus and goal and obsession and love in life are things that have no value, then I can stop that. And I can turn my attention in a different way. You want to hear a description of what worthless looks like? What I don't care about me looks like if it was a place? In verse number 6, they ask this question, who led us in the wilderness in a land of deserts and pits, in a land of drought and deep darkness, in a land that none passes through, where no man dwells? If you wanted to describe what I don't care about me looks like as a place, that's it. But I also want you to hear verses 14 and 15. Verse 13. God says, my people have committed 2 evils. Number 1, they've forsaken me. Number 2, they've hewn out cisterns for themselves, broken cisterns that can hold no water. Is it the case that we're worshiping things that are worthless? Is Israel a slave? Is he a homeborn servant? The answer to that question is no. Who told you that you were worthless? The lions have roared against him. They have roared loudly. They've made his land a waste. His cities are in ruins without inhabitation. I want to ask you this question. Who told you you were worthless? I know in the case of some, it might have been somebody that was supposed to love you. But in the case of many of us, it's not that somebody is telling us we're worthless. We're worshiping worthless things. Do you hear the lion roaring? Be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walking about, seeking whom he may devour. I want to tell you something. If you think you're worthless, you're being lied to. I wish I could magically make your feeling go away. It's not possible. But it's also not necessary. Because you have the power right now to do something about it. You can take the first step by coming and giving your life to the one who shows you that you're not just not only are you not worthless, you're worth his blood. You're worth his life. You're worth him giving up everything and becoming a servant so that you could inherit eternal life. I want to ask you a real simple question. Do you have the power to do that? Y'all going to let me go Bill for a minute? I just asked you a question. Do you have the power to do that? All right, let's try this one more time. Do you have the power to do something about that? All right, so now's the real important question. Are you going to do anything about it? Maybe you're sitting here right now and saying, I don't really care what happens to me. And I'm not going to promise you you're going to leave here thinking that you're not going to feel, or you're going to leave here and not feel that way anymore, but I can promise you this: if you'll take the first step by coming to God, allowing Him to redeem you through His Son Jesus, allowing Him to begin working in you through His Word and through His people to transform your mind. And if you'll make a commitment every day to do those things, to spend time in communion with Him, listening to what He has to say more than listening to what those others have to say about you, or maybe even more than you hear what you have to say about yourself in your own head, then you can at least do something about making that change. When I ask you this question, are you going to do something about it today? Or you going to wad up that paper towel, throw it in the trash, and say it's not worth anything to me? If you look around the room, you're with people who brought you here because you matter to them. Maybe they've never said it. Maybe y'all can have that conversation after today. But you're here with people who care about you and think you're worth something. And even if you don't care about yourself right now, one of the beautiful things about the church is God's people love you enough to care about you when you don't even care about yourself. But why don't you help? Why don't you do something? Spen's going to lead us in a song. We're going to be standing down front. If you need to come to Jesus for the first time and be born again in baptism, do that today. If you need to come to Jesus and say, Lord, I have worshiped things that are worthless and they've made me feel worthless, I need to be filled with your love and forgiveness, then make that request too. Let us come while we stand and sing.